Hi, I'm Graham Nolan, co-chair of Storytelling and Partnerships for Do the Work, he, him, his pronouns, and you're joining our first Hey Fam episode after Pride Month. Good news is that Pride for us is every single day, and we're here to make sure that it's every day for the rest of the advertising industry as well. Before we jump in, Do the Work is a queer creative community and platform, empowering the ad industry and marketers alike to inspire, reward, and celebrate queer creativity within marketing and advertising culture. We know that active inclusion for queer talent unleashes untapped potential to advance business. In short, when we're ourselves, everyone wins. So today with Hey Fam, we're having a discussion to explore how we, and you, stay creative and connect with queer creativity, especially during quarantine, to keep inspired and do the damn work. And by the way, I'm staying inspired this week by the new Jessie Ware album. It's called What's Your Pleasure? Everyone must hear it, I insist. So here's what you can expect from our show. Our amazing guests, Blaise Preau of HBO and Simon Fenwick of the 4As, will talk for about half an hour. And so they stay focused on really diving into their own creative processes. They're not going to be paying attention to the chat during that time. But submit questions whenever you're inspired in the Q&A section, not the chat. There's a button specifically for Q&A. And then near the end of the show, our producer Jake is going to read us the questions that we can address for like a good 10 minutes total. Creativity is a positive energy, so we have some ground rules to maintain that. Questions can be honest and challenging, but should also be kind. Keep it focused on how we can change the work, talent, and culture of advertising, which is a broad topic, so there should be plenty of material to cover there. And just know that we'll get to as many questions as we can during that segment. Housekeeping items are done. We're going to let our amazing guests introduce themselves to each other and to you in the process to kick off the conversation. The floor is yours.
Oh, sorry. Hey. Hey, everybody. Thanks, Graham. Appreciate the intro. So I'm Blaise Preau with HBO, but I will toss it over to Simon to tell us a little bit about himself.
Hi, thanks, Blaise. Hi, everybody. I'm Simon Fenwick, and I'm the Executive Vice President of Talent, Equity and Inclusion at the 4As, which is the American Association of Advertising Agencies. I guess I can talk a little bit about who I am. I was born in Kenya, East Africa. I was raised in school in New Zealand and moved back to Australia as soon as I pretty much got out of school. And then moved to New York 15 years ago. So I think I'm with Blaise on that. We've both been in New Yorkers for about the same time. And a lot of people ask me the question, why did I want to move to New York? I think it was always a childhood dream, but for any of you who have been to Australia or New Zealand, you'll know that they're great places to visit, not great places to live. So I just always wanted a little bit more pizzazz and sparkle, so certainly get that in New York. I started my career in sales. I mean, I think most people start in some sort of sales job. I'm a self-confessed nerd, so that was never going to work for me because I'm inherently a bit of an introvert, although I come across as an extrovert. So the idea of sitting in front of people all day selling stuff just was not my cup of tea. So I quickly found that I actually did really well in consulting and ended up in consulting in the people space. So everything from coaching and assessment development. This was a long time ago, so I'm old. So it was pretty novel then to have performance reviews and for leaders to get coaching. And we used to, I'm Lominger qualified, so we used to build, assessment tools out of the Lominger card sort. So we do 9 boxes and all that sort of stuff, and pigeonhole people very much into buckets, which today would absolutely not last. So I moved to New York with the company that I was working with in Australia. Did what every good immigrant does, got my green card, and 6 weeks after I got my green card, promptly resigned and went to another company. So happens to every company that brings people. Actually, and that's how I got into really the advertising field directly. A client of mine, Starcom MediaVest Group, I was consulting into them for about 5 years, and Laura Desmond, who was then the CEO, rang me up and said, one day said, why don't you come work on the dark side? And little did I know that she was not kidding. Advertising is very much the dark side, but a good dark side. I love it. I thrive in it. So I've been in the industry across Publicis and into Public Group, spent a little time at Facebook, and now at the 4As.
Wow.
And that's about me.
All right, awesome. Well, thank you. Appreciate that. So I'm Blaise Preau. I'm the Director of Multicultural Marketing at HBO. Multicultural is a smaller team inside of consumer marketing. So we push programming and audiences, but we get to dive a little deeper into what are, I think, what were previously called niche audiences, which are now pretty mass, which are LGBT, Latinx, African American, Asian American. Yeah, that's what we do at HBO. We like to center our programming or our efforts around programming, whether it's shows, movies, new content, and then we'll also reach out to those audiences in lieu of programming. Sometimes there isn't always a million LGBT shows coming out, although right now it feels like there are, which is a good problem to have. God, as you said, moved to New York 15 years ago, was born and raised in the South. If you're born and raised in the South, you know why you moved to New York. And worked in magazine publishing when those were a thing. Worked at the New Yorker for a bit. I'm just doing this from memory now. I'm like, worked at AOL, worked at a brief stint at Showtime, and then had an opportunity to come to HBO, and have loved it ever since. Been a couple of years now.
Awesome.
That's me.
Thanks, Blaise. I'm going to ask you 2 questions up front, because first of all, I want to know where the name Blaise came from, because it's probably the coolest name I've ever heard, and I've never heard of it before. So that's the first part of the question.
Okay.
The second part is, I think we're both kind of secret petrol heads. So talk to me a little bit about why you're a petrol head, and then I'll explain why I am.
Okay. First question first. Blaise is my grandfather's name. He was named after a Catholic saint. There was a Saint Blaise. So yeah, it's actually a family name. Most people think it's either a name I gave myself or a stage name. For what talent, I don't know. So that's the name. And then the petrolhead thing. Yeah, it's funny. I mean, if this was therapy, we could go into an hour of why liking cars when I was little was a bond that I had with my dad. But it's carried into adulthood. I carried it into quarantine, where I drove an old car 1,000 miles to the south to ride out the quarantine at my sister's house, and have been fixing it up, which is why it's now being sold for parts. So that's a long story short. It doesn't run anymore, not going great, and I'm renting a car to drive home at the end of the week. But what about you?
Well, so I don't think I'm a very good gay, because I like all the things that aren't traditionally enjoyed in the queer community. But so I'm a huge Formula One fan. So that is Formula One racing. I've been to about a third of the total races every year. So there's 21 races in the championship. They're held in 21 different cities around the world. So it's really exciting. Some are on streets, some are on circuits. And I have sort of a desire on my bucket list that I'm going to go to all 21 before I die. So I've got, a good 20 years to do the rest of them, I guess, hopefully. And yeah, I this is going to make me sound very inappropriate. I like really fast things. Like I like fast cars. I like fast things. So I'm kind of turned on by the smell.
I want to make like a fast guys joke, but I'm like, you know what? I'll let you just keep going.
Yeah, I like sort of the smell of the petrol, and I'm sort of turned on by the sound, and so it's for me like an adrenaline rush and a way to forget about the day-to-day crap that we go through.
Oh, all right, very interesting. Well, so you sort of first off started off by describing yourself as like a bad gay, which I don't think there's any such thing. But how has like being a queer person in this, what would you say, like being a queer person in the industry has been like?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, for me, it's been interesting. I think that the industry is very is very open-minded and is very accepting of the queer community. But I do think that there are still a lot of microaggressions, and I've encountered those microaggressions over the last, 15 years. You know, I still think that, a lot is said in jest that maybe isn't meant to be said in jest. I think the one thing that I've struggled the most with, particularly in the industry, is, that the inevitable conversation on a Monday morning when, when senior leaders or people are sitting in a room and they sort of start talking about their weekend, and the person gets to you and doesn't ask you the same question, or doesn't ask you about your family, or doesn't ask you about your husband or your wife. And I think for me, that experience has, particularly in the last 4 or 5 years, I've actually gone out of my way to say, actually, I had a great weekend and this is what I did. And I don't have a partner, but, I really enjoyed it with friends. And you can almost see that just the level of discomfort still on people's faces. I think the other thing where it really shows up that I've noticed is, a lot of LGBTQI plus employees still don't feel comfortable putting the photos of their partners and their families on their desks. And so I think that, as I've walked around and I've seen, the desks of co-workers, I'm kind of like, there's almost still this sort of slightly cellophane wrap around their lives, that it's like, I'm going to let you know a certain amount, but not really as much as I probably would like to.
Interesting.
How have you, can I ask you just in return, like, how have you found, the entertainment industry?
It's pretty gay. No, I was just going to say, like, so being able to work kind of on the LGBT audience for a company like HBO, not to sort of like, give like the Kool-Aid, but I think HBO has long stood by that audience and created content for that audience and important programming around that audience. So I feel like in recent years, there's been this sort of shift to like suddenly seem very LGBT friendly during Pride Month only. And I sort of feel like with HBO, luckily I kind of have the pedigree to be like, no, we've been here for a while. This is not a new thing. It's not something we're sort of like pretending to do as of, last year or the year before. And then obviously just being, working on the LGBT audience initiatives for HBO, it's the gayest job. Like it is literally my job to lean into that audience and to know what's going on. And sometimes it's as simple as talking to, the employee resource group, the LGBT employee resource group, to be like, what is the band or the party or the venue or the new bar or the thing, but also just inherently knowing what it is also. And so we say like for our audience initiative that we're allowing people to celebrate their proudest and queerest selves, and so I have to bring that to work every day. So I'm very, very lucky in that regard. I've been talking to a lot of people who don't feel the same way at work, or don't have the opportunity to feel the same way at work. So I feel very lucky to have that. It's an integral part of what I do.
That's amazing. So I guess with that, how did you navigate Pride sort of being predestined for a moment that now included a fight for racial equality? Like, how is that sort of, how have you adapted?
Yeah, that was, it was a challenge only in that there was a lot of things that we had already had in motion for Pride that we had to sort of pull a lot of levers to stop. But we decided pretty early on, probably around the first weekend of June, when the protest really was starting to build, and it was really, and even the Black Lives Matter movement was creating a moment, we decided very early on, because we're the multicultural team, and because we are there for all of those audiences, including the African American audience, but everyone else surrounding it, that anything we did that took away or detracted, like basically any oxygen in the room that we took away from that movement was going to hurt it. So that while we think that there is a place for like a thoughtful sort of reimagining of Pride, um, we didn't want to say like, oh yes, Black Lives Matter, but also Happy Pride. Like it just felt like you're asking people to look and focus on at something completely different. And frankly, if this moment, we felt this moment really deserved the attention it was getting. And so we did not feel like it was um, the right thing to do to take anything away from that. So we really paused everything on the Pride front for about 2.5 weeks until we felt like there was a way that we could weave it into the moment and say, keeping in mind everything that's happening now, and believing strongly in everything that's happening now, there is a way that Pride is also linked to that, and we can honor that. And so it was sort of, less, I guess celebratory would maybe be the word. Like we didn't want to, again, not be mindful of the moment. So sort of a reverent, thoughtful Pride.
Yeah.
So it was a challenge, but again, I don't know if there was another way to do it because it felt like the right way.
Yeah, and I don't think you were alone. I mean, certainly in the industry, talking to our members and their clients, the brands, I think everyone was sort of feeling the same way. I think the challenge that a lot of our members had when doing the work for their clients was last year was such a banner year for the pink dollar. With World Pride, it seemed like every brand suddenly had sort of decided to participate, some successfully, some not successfully. The good thing about our community is we're pretty transparent and we see through sort of, when someone's giving us BS. But I do think that this year it was very interesting how that transition into the intersectionality of the Black Lives Matter movement and the gay movement, even from the origins of Stonewall, was really, I think, well done by so many brands. And I don't mean well done and pat ourselves on the back, but I think there was a lot of thought and appreciation for the moment, and the importance of the moment. So, I've heard a lot of people say, oh, it didn't feel the same and we missed our Pride. And I'm like, actually, I think it had more meaning in some ways.
Right. I would agree. I think that, I think everyone knows the history, and the history is of them tied together. So I think people, I would honestly say, I would venture to say that brands felt more okay or more emboldened to say that there is that the histories are more intertwined than I think. Oftentimes we talk about our efforts for LGBT marketing because oftentimes LGBT marketing means white gay men. And so we are often trying to look at everything we do and make sure we're talking to everyone. Because if you actually intend to talk to the audience, you should talk to the entire audience. But it shouldn't just be sort of following that dollar, for lack of a better term. But I think some some brands that are selling CPG, maybe that's their thing, or maybe that's their metrics that they can flash out for. But yeah, I think it was a different Pride because of the moment that was happening and also the pandemic. And I would ask, like, how has your mindset shifted at all post-mid pandemic?
Well, that's a big question. I mean, I think back to mid-February when, we were all in the office. We were actually running a huge conference for our multicultural advertising intern alumni, which is the largest group of multicultural people in the industry. We had 400 people at a venue, and we were doing we were doing panels and discussions and workshops, and literally a week and a half later, we were suddenly all home. And so my mindset sort of shifted from, being busy, surrounded by people, and having the knowledge and the ability to share ideas in real time, to suddenly having to traverse the world in this virtual world that no one was really used to. With video conferencing we'd kind of done, but it wasn't really something that was used regularly. And so I think my mind suddenly sort of went into overload around, how do I look after my team? How do I make sure that, they've got everything they need? My team is majority underrepresented community. So they come from very different backgrounds. They live in multi-generational families. So my concern was sort of around, do they have internet connection? Do they have the ability to be able to work in a safe, in a quiet place? If they don't, how are we going to make adjustments for that? So it was sort of my mind shifted from work to really caring about my team and really thinking about what is best for them. So almost like work for a couple of weeks kind of took a back step. And then, I live alone. We were talking about this earlier. I live alone. And so, for 2.5 months, I literally, other than my doorman and a few people in the store, I didn't see another human being. I didn't touch another human being for 3 months. I mean, I hugged my first friend like 2 weeks ago.
Right.
So there was that sort of mindset of dealing with the strangeness of being alone and being separated. And it was very much for me, I'm very much a loner. I enjoy my own company. I do a lot of reading, and but I was starting to find that I missed that connection, and I missed the ability to laugh with people, and going to have a drink at a bar, which I hardly ever do, but now I'm dying to do. Sitting at a bar having dinner on my own in New York. For anyone that lives in New York, that's a quintessential thing to do in the city. I missed that. And then, of course, we had the George Floyd murder and subsequent news. And so my mind then shifted from, okay, now I've just got used to how to deal with the pandemic. I realize it's probably going to be another 12 months before we're all back in the office. And then in my role, the racial injustice movement that started particularly affected my role and my team. And so, the last 4 weeks have just been, I've had, hundreds of people crying and laughing and screaming at me, and they're not yelling at me, but they're just, venting. So the last month, I kind of am like, all right, where do we go from here? That was a long answer, sorry.
No. Listen, it's an honest answer.
So with that, did quarantine, so I'll preface this by saying, I think I've watched every single show that is available on HBO, Netflix, Disney, because and now I'm TV'd out. But did the quarantine affect HBO programming and your promotional efforts? And how did you guys manage through that?
Yeah, it did. It was, so we were, obviously there's a production delay on the shows that are, to come later this year, later this summer. We launched HBO Max, which is the new streaming product. I think half of the shows that it was supposed to launch with were actually able to come out at launch because of production delays. But, our team, we believe strongly in live events. And so we did like 140 live events last year. And so to suddenly just not have live events anymore was a pretty sudden shift. And so I think our first show, I think we left the office like March 9th or 11th, I think. And we had We're Here premiering in April, so about a month later. It was originally we were gonna have a huge activation at South by Southwest. I kept calling it the queerest thing that South by Southwest has ever seen. We were gonna literally offer to put drag on people, thousands, tens and thousands of people. And so we had, South by Southwest was canceled. Well, so what does that look like? How would we do that if we could shift it somewhere? So we ended up taking all of the product that we had bought that we were going to use and repackaging it into kits that we sent to about 400 celebrities and influencers that either were connected with the show or fans of the show, fans of the Queens. And it was pretty huge. We had more of like a grassroots marketing buzz around that. And I don't know that we would have ever thought to do that before we were forced to do that. We've also tried all kinds of new premiere platforms. We've premiered things on YouTube, screeners. Obviously we premiere them linearly on the network. We premiere them on different sites. So it's constantly been changing. You know, a month after we're here, we premiered Legendary on HBO Max, which is a show about, it's a competition reality show for ball culture. So even that was different than the show a month before. You know, we just held Pride, and now we're sort of talking about the things that are coming later in the summer. We have a show from Luca Guadagnino, and we're thinking about what that looks like. Is it all virtual? Are there things now that tie in, you know, some sort of live events for a smaller group that is then streamed on a larger platform? It's truly evolving. I mean, to think of the things we had in April that we were calling learnings, it feels like 10 years ago. So yeah, I mean, I think we've tried our best to be as flexible as possible, and I think just everyone's willingness to learn and adapt has been key. But I think we pulled it off.
With that in mind, like I guess, and I've always been fascinated with this, as the culture is changing so quickly and acceptance is around us everywhere. How does a company like HBO decide what sort of programming and to what level they can stretch programming for the broader America? So do you sort of say there's a certain amount that we will allocate to LGBTQI programming, or is it sort of we're going to try and embed it in everything we do now? Like, have you had pushback? It's a big question, but like, have you had pushback? How do you manage the different markets, I guess?
You know, it's interesting. As far as from a programming perspective, I wish I got to choose the programming for the show, but unfortunately I don't. But I think, again, back to that sort of historical, like HBO has never been afraid to push boundaries. They've never been afraid. So I think they, from a programmer's perspective, they have, if a show is good, they'll take it. What we do on our team as far as marketing and promotion, I constantly push boundaries because I think it's fun and I think it's interesting and I think it's more compelling. We had a show last fall called Mrs. Fletcher, which was a small limited run series with Catherine Hahn. But there was a character in it who was trans, played by the amazing Jen Richards, who's a trans actress. And so we did a pop-up in West Hollywood that was basically a pop-up sex shop that offered all kinds of information, tools, toys, education on safe sex for everyone in the LGBTQIA plus spectrum. And I thought that was kind of out there as far as an idea, and took it to my boss, and she kind of, looked at it and hemmed and hawed. I took it to legal. Legal oddly did not have any trouble with it. And we did it. And looking back, it seems almost quaint, the things we did. We ended up shipping these kits, these tool kits filled with sex toys, again, to influencers and celebrities. And they posted all over social media these unboxing videos, which are pretty wild. You should go check it out. But again, I have to say, selfishly, I think because I get to work for HBO in a place that pushes the boundaries with the programming, I want to push the boundaries with how we market them. And I also just, again, selfishly, it keeps it fun, it keeps it interesting. If I did the same thing every time, I would get bored. I wouldn't be compelled to do what we do. So I sort of think if there's a way to keep it interesting, why not?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's important, and I sort of recall a conversation I had maybe 10 years ago when I was with Publicis, and there was, and I had an office, and there was a couple of entry-level people sitting out the front, and one of them knocked on my door one day, and I'd never talked to this guy, and he'd just moved to New York. It was his first job. He was 2 months into it, and he sort of came into the office, and I was, I'm pretty out in the workplace. I have been for a long time. I don't hide anything. Wouldn't tell today, but I dress pretty flamboyantly. And he sort of knocked on my door and he said, I just wanted to thank you. And I looked at him and I said, why? And he said, because you've given me the courage to come out at work. And he said, I've watched things on TV, but I've never come out to my parents or my family. And it isn't until I moved to New York that I'm feeling more comfortable. So I came out to my parents, and I told them that I had there was this guy that worked in an office that was gay and that I could do that as well. And I remember thinking at the time, he specifically talked about the programming he'd watched and, and how that had helped him through, challenging times. And I think it's really important to see that, the queer community is being represented in so much programming now, because it, for want of a better term, it normalizes, that being queer is, part of the fabric of who we are.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think a show, again, not to like tout our content, but I think something like We're Here, I think oddly it came at a time where I think the nation needed it. But I think what I loved about the show is that it shows how much art there is in the community, how much pain there is in the community, but also how much art there is in helping people process that pain and have hope and have moments of elation, whether it's a giant drag show that's produced in a small town or not. But yeah, I mean, I think it's good to just, whether it's, comedies that make people laugh or dramas that make people cry, I think it's all really important. Along those lines, what's making you like laugh and cry? And I know you said you're all tapped out for programming, but what are you enjoying these days?
No, I mean, I think I'm on my 4th or 5th run of Insecure, which I think is one of the funniest programs in the world. So that makes me laugh. I think we talked about the fact that I'm probably way too old for this, but I joined TikTok about a month ago, and I don't post anything, but I have to tell you, I will lie in bed at night for like an hour hysterically in laughs watching TikTok. It's one of the funniest things I've seen.
I've heard that from so many people. I am not there yet, but I respect everyone who is there. I have nothing against it. People send me videos and I watch it and I go, I don't know what I'm supposed to do with that. I don't know what's my reaction.
It's a lot of people trying to be famous, and it's hysterical. I think the other thing for me that has, I'm a big fan of Schitt's Creek, so I think I'm on my 4th rerun of that. I think one of the things and this is going to sound really bitter, but it's not. I think what's made me really laugh is, at the beginning of the pandemic, everyone was posting their home workouts with their shirts off, and all my friends were like, look at me, look at me. Now they've all got their shirts on, or they're just not posting them anymore. So I'm often on the phone with them, laughing my head off, going, where are all those videos of you shirtless with, doing your home workouts? That's the better twisted side of me. That's like,
when summer was canceled, it was fine. You could put the dumbbells away. We're all good. Everyone's good.
Totally. What about you? What's making you laugh during this time?
Oh, wow. You know what? I finished Insecure. I've actually started, I've started watching Luca Guadagnino's show, which no one can watch, so I shouldn't talk about that. But honestly, Instagram is sort of keeping me, I feel like, educated / entertained. I think that there is so many people sharing so many things that are political and topical, and I feel like that is my sort of connection. I am nearly 4 months, I've been in rural Eastern Alabama. It's a lovely town. It's a college town without any college kids. It's nature. But I'm with family, but I felt very lonely or alone in this world. And you're talking about like living alone. I'm kind of ready to get back to the city, even though it's not the city that I know. So I've been using social media and Instagram to sort of like still feel tethered to the people and the places that I love, and going down rabbit holes, kind of how you're doing on TikTok. I'll go down an Instagram rabbit hole. Maybe it's a shirtless exercise video, or maybe it's something about cars. And then I'll end up like 35 minutes in and I have no idea who I'm looking at or why. And I think it was just mind numbing enough to get there. And then I'm like, all right, we're done.
Yeah. So with that, like, where will you go next when COVID-19 is over? Like, what do you want to do? Where do you want to go?
I was supposed to have a trip to Italy now-ish, I guess, middle of July. There's a sailboat that you can take that just sort of, it's like 8 people and it sails you around for 11 days. I had paid for it like a year ago. That has since been postponed. And so I think it's going to be, I think this weekend I'm going to drive up to P-Town for a little 4th of July vacation. Again, by myself. I think I'll know some people there. I think it's obviously going to be a different version of P-Town than Provincetown, if anyone doesn't know about Provincetown. Yeah, I'm excited to go for a few days and just unplug, unwind. How about yourself?
Well, first of all, I think it's going to be like 2021 before we actually get to do that. So, or certainly travel. Europe's out of the question because, Americans, we can't travel to Europe. So, that's killed that idea. I actually, funnily enough, probably would like to go home. Right now my parents live in New Zealand and they've closed their borders to pretty much everyone, which is why they've been so successful. They're elderly. So I kind of feel as soon as COVID-19's over, I'd probably like to go and see them. They're in their 80s. So, I need to do the good son thing. But if I got to choose, probably Italy. Like go and find a house like on Lake Como and just sit by the lake and drink rosé and, eat pasta.
I mean, it sounds lovely.
Right.
If we overlap, I'll wave from the other side of the lake.
Perfect. So what does the rest of the year look like for you? Like what does the rest of this horrible year in history?
Yeah, I'll say, I mentioned Luca Guadagnino's show, which will come out in September. We have a great documentary called Transhood coming out in November. And so I think we're trying to figure out, what those promotional efforts look like, what sort of the virtual events that we've been having, how those can continue. And then what we call our audience efforts. So really to talk to that audience in the gap between those two shows. I think again, it's sort of what we would do now is, I believe, more evolved than what we would have done in May. And what we'll do in August or September will probably be different than what we would do now. So I think it's just trying to sort of stay the most up to date and abreast and adaptive. How about yourself?
I think it's the same. I think we're sort of converting everything to virtual. We've resurrected, obviously, because of Black Lives Matter, we've resurrected some programs that we were putting on hold to launch because of COVID-19. I think for me and for the 4As, it's like, how do we help our members? We have about 700 member agencies. And it's how do we help them navigate the return to workplace, remembering that a lot of those agencies aren't in the metropolitan areas. And a lot of them are in, hard hit areas now, like, Dallas and Austin and Houston and, and Atlanta and California. And so they're all, looking for guidance because they're not getting it out of the federal government, sometimes not getting it out of the state government. So they're kind of looking to us as the association to say, what should we do? How should we manage this? So a lot of planning, I think, around that. And then I think, the whole advertising industry, I think, is, on the precipice of sort of freaking out, if you like, because, they can't get the production on the ads that they need to produce. They haven't got the talent available to do what they need to do. So there's a lot of creative thinking, and that's a good thing. But I am worried about the impact of, of the brands spending money on advertising, which we've already seen a reduction on. And I sort of feel like if COVID goes into 2021, sorry, see, I'm already thinking it's 2019. Then I think, that's going to have a really big impact on the industry. The industry's lost about 53,000 jobs so far, which is significant. So I think, we've got a lot to try and manage as the association around how do we help our members navigate through that. So that's going to keep me pretty busy, I think.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to sort of say, what do you think? So obviously, being in entertainment, I'm going to veer off a little bit and just talk between you and I. What do you think of the current the current climate around sort of the ability to post news stories and the validity of news stories across social media, because it's something that we're being hit with as the association on what stance should advertisers and the industry take.
You know, it's interesting you ask that. I feel like even as recently as last week, with a number of major advertisers moving off of Facebook, as you know, as a backlash to their sort of inactivity, if you will, on incendiary posts or things that seem blatantly untrue. I personally, I was actually having this conversation with someone in my family over the weekend. I kind of think we're to a place where I think people are tired enough of it to actually demand change. And I think, you know, with Twitter making recent tweaks to either like warning labels or pulling certain things, and other platforms doing kind of similar, and then they're all going to be beholden to the almighty dollar, the almighty advertising dollar. So I think, you know, Facebook's, I sort of hope that they're forced to act, but, you know, I think that there is hopefully a change coming. That would be my just personal belief, is that I think the shifts are large enough that they'll actually be.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think the big question, you know, right now is, you know, should they be held to the same standards as, you know, the networks and the cable organizations, you know, who are new, you know, content providers versus platforms. And we do a lot of, the 4As does a lot of work, advocacy work in Washington, DC. We have a team there. So we work on a number of bills. We were instrumental in leading some of the privacy bills that have been passed, some of the data bills that have been passed. And there's a lot of talk right now around, you know, how is Congress, maybe in the new Congress, is going to address the platform versus content, you know, and treat them more as a publisher versus you know, a platform, which I think is really important. And I think it's, you know, the interesting thing is, you know, I'm not on Facebook anymore. I actually deleted my Facebook account, which is, you know, this isn't making my friends at Facebook very happy. It was one of the best things I've ever done in my life, because I find that I'm not getting barraged with, you know, negative news all the time. But what I did find was, you know, I think that the social networks still play a really big role in social movements. And when I think about, you know, our community, and I think about, you know, the SCOTUS announcements the last couple of weeks, and we've taken sort of a step forward with, you know, discrimination in the workplace being outlawed, but then, you know, transgender healthcare, you know, was voted down. I think that the move, to your point, I think sort of the movement and the ability to rally, you know, the masses over social media is going to drive and force people to change more.
I agree, and hopefully. And I just wanted to ask you, so when you were speaking about, you know, having lived here for 15 years, but having been born and raised elsewhere, sort of, I don't know if you might feel like you're still somewhat of an outsider looking in to the country that you live in, that you work in. But if you felt like there was anything that, like if you felt like you could sort of direct the attention of the nation of what are the things that it sort of needs to either work on or address, I'm curious what you would think of those might be.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, we could spend like 3 hours talking about this. You know, I said,
think you're gonna, no, it's good.
I said this, I was talking to somebody yesterday about this, and I said, you know, I love this country and I chose to come here and I'll never leave. But there are, you know, it frustrates me too, because, you know, a lot of things in the States are done under the guise of freedom, as if America is the only free country. And I come from two countries that are as free as America, but has common sense. And I think, you know, what frustrates me right now is, you know, every other country that's had COVID-19, maybe short of Brazil, which, you know, we can talk about why they're the same. You know, we're still seeing the curve go up, and it's because, you know, the basic principles of what we need to do aren't adhered to. So I think if I was sort of going to think about three things to focus on, for me, it's like healthcare for all. I don't understand how you can be the most advanced society in the world and not provide a basic human right to every man, woman, and child. And you know, most of the other Western countries have managed to provide free healthcare for all. What that looks like, I don't know, but I think obviously racial justice. You know, everyone's sort of like, well, we need to break systemic racism. Yes, we do, but it's not going to happen overnight. But we need to start the journey. And as somebody who's come from two countries where reparations were made to the indigenous peoples of both those countries, I do think we need to discuss reparations for, you know, African American populations. I think until we accept and admit that what we did was wrong, I think it's going to be really hard to break down systemic racism. And then I think, you know, I'm going to say a new president, please, just please. Like, I know nobody's really enthralled by him,
but honestly, if you're offended by that,
what's that? Sorry.
No, I was just saying I feel like you're amongst friends with that request, but
and all I'll say to this is he wasn't any of our first choice. He isn't the most dynamic person, but please just go and vote for him because he's going to be better than what we have. And I was actually talking to a friend of mine who is a conservative gay man who voted for Trump, who's still thinking about voting for Trump. And, you know, when you get into that conversation, I was like, but what is he, you know, what does he stand for our community? And it's, yeah. And
I bet that is a really interesting conversation.
Very interesting conversation. Struggle to sometimes remain friends, but it's
that's impressive. That's impressive. I mean, I myself have, you know, conservative family members, and during this quarantine time have forced some heavier conversations that I felt like I was like, we can't like dance around this anymore. We have to talk about it. I think the net was that my facts and their facts are different, and so just kind of like, all right, well, hey, that's something then.
Alternative facts are actually facts, as Kellyanne Conway once told us. So as you return to New York, and I'm just thinking about something you said earlier, and knowing it's going to be different, like what would you say to? You're going to go, I didn't realize you were going to ask me this question. What would you say to the younger queer people in our community who are moving to New York, who have just moved to New York, who aren't experiencing what you and I have experienced, which was, you know, 15 years ago, New York was a different place to what it was a year ago. Like, what would you say to them in, you know, coming into the city that is shut down?
You know, I would say get involved, and that is a complicated answer because I am saying it as someone who has ridden out the quarantine in a completely different part of the country. So I feel a lot of survivor's remorse and sort of guilt of watching what the city went through, and also watching the civil unrest, but then watching the protests and the vocal just everyone sort of protesting and fighting, and feeling very removed, almost in a sad way of like, I wish I could be there with people and be a part of it. I feel, I just feel really removed. So I would say what I want to do when I get back is get involved. And I would say, if you are an LGBT, a young person in the community who's moving into the city that isn't quite the Oz that it might have been while things are shut down, I would say there's still ways to find community there, whether it's through civic action or volunteer or, you know, I think you can still, and I'm saying this without having read the rules, but you know, I think you can still, with a mask on, congregate at a safe distance outside. And I think, you know, the Queer Liberation March that I saw happen on Sunday, which to your point, looked more like what Pride originally was. And that was really heartwarming to watch. Again, unfortunately from a distance, but to watch, it seemed like everybody I knew was there. And so I would say, if you were new to the city, I hope you found it. If you're new to the city after it, I hope you find like something like that will still exist. And that is, I think, in my mind, the beauty and the magic of New York. It's never going to not be a place that welcomes everybody, and it's never going to not be a place where everyone can find something. And so look for it and you'll find it, I guess would be my advice. But just get involved. I think getting involved is the fastest way to remind you that your problems aren't the only problems, and to remind you that everyone can do something.
Awesome. I think we might be getting close to questions. We're getting some questions.
Yeah. Hi, guys. This is
Hi.
Voice from God. Just stepping in here. That seems like a nice time to segue to some questions, because some of them are related to what you guys were just touching on. Knowing that, Blaise, you touched upon this a little bit, knowing that you adjusted messaging for Pride this year to really support and not detract from the Black Lives Matter movement, did you use any sort of safeguards or checks or sort of focus groups for campaigns messaging to ensure that it was going to be received as intended? It's always a scary thing to sort of put something out there and not know, how it's going to be received.
I'll say, and this is just honestly the candid answer, time didn't really allow for us to over-market the moment. I think we used our guts, mine, members of the team, African-American members of the team, Latinx members of the team, to make sure that what we were saying was truthful, was inclusive, and resonated without seeming opportunistic or seeming like we were trying to take advantage of the moment and sort of spin it into something else. And I think, I think when it really is your core belief that everyone is deserving, you just need to sort of get that part out, I guess. And I think if you do that honestly, the rest somewhat falls into place. I mean, I'll be honest, there was a lot of fear though, because there were so many things in the moment that were sort of people trying to, maybe they intended to say something good and then they were sort of dragged, whether it was a brand or a person, people that wanted to sort of like jump into the moment and help it. And so we were sure not to suddenly say that we have a solution for the moment. It was like, no, we don't. We just know it needs to be solved as much as everyone else. So there was a little bit of like the honesty of not pretending to know, everything about the situation, and just be heartfelt, be honest, say it. And luckily there wasn't a backlash. And I was, not to say I wasn't very afraid of that, very afraid of that. If you put anything out there, it might be misconstrued and honestly misconstrued. Like people might they don't see your true intention, or they don't see what you're trying to do. So, we sort of spoke from the heart, but honestly, and it worked.
That's great. And then I guess I sort of leads into the next question for both of you. How do you feel like how do you feel like we can address the diversity within the LGBTQIA community and connect with those specific audiences? There are so many letters that are in our alphabet, and we want to be inclusive and representative of everybody. But you can't, always just put out a blanket statement. It could feel disingenuous. So how do you really sort of target that message to make certain parts of our community feel more heard?
You want me to go? Yeah, so I think it's a really good question. And, it's starting to get really confusing because it feels like every letter in the alphabet's being added. And I think we as a community need to come up with another way to represent ourselves. I do think that, trying to lump us all together into one big bucket is kind of like saying we're going to, pick all people of, all black people and put them in one bucket and say, well, they're all the same and their experiences are all the same, and they're not. And so I couldn't imagine the experiences of being a transgender man or a transgender woman. I have a very close friend of mine who is a transgender man, and I'm still blown away when he tells me stories about what he's gone through and the experiences he's had. And so I think for the general market to assume that he and I both have the same desires, we both like the same products, we both have the same interests simply because we're queer, is sort of generalizing us to dumbing down what being queer actually means. And I think what we've got to try and do is identify the segments of our population and try and address the individual experiences of those population groups. There's officially 53 different terms for sexual identity right now. Some of those I'm still learning about. And we can't expect, I think, the general population to understand all of those overnight. But I think we've got to start differentiating what we represent with the identities that the general population is aware of. And I think we need to, really embrace and celebrate those differences, and make sure that as a community ourselves, one of the biggest things that frustrates me about my own community is we are quite inherently racist and sexist and biased. And, a lot of gay men, struggle with having friends who are lesbians, or don't go to, the bars are very segregated. So you'll have gay bars and you'll have lesbian bars. And, in the major cities, that has always blown me away, because you go to a smaller location and, it's much more, the intersectionality is much greater. So I do think that, we need to get away from this, I'm only interested in this type of man. And by saying that you're interested in that type of man, you're actually being completely, racist and opinionated against a whole group of people. So I'm kind of going all over the place, but I do think we have to, if we can't rally behind each other and love each other for the differences that we bring, and not shame people because of the way they look or the way they act or the way they dress, then we can't hope for the rest of humanity to accept us the way we want to be accepted. Long answer, sorry.
No, I think that's great. I think we all see those sort of issues creeping up here and there, and right now it's really in the forefront of people's minds. And I think if there was ever an opportunity to change the conversation, now would be the time. Just one final question. I do want to be cognizant of the time, but speaking of diversity, you both hold fairly high up in important roles at your respective companies. How much control do you have in terms of hiring diverse employees? And is it a process that you're super hands-on with, or do you notice that maybe some of the more diverse candidates get weeded out before they reach you, or how, can you speak to that process a little bit?
I'll just jump in quickly and say, we are the multicultural marketing team. So we are diverse by nature. I was happy to be the only Caucasian male on the team. And just, I think we want people who have those lived experiences. And so there is definitely a mindfulness to make sure that the talent pool that's even coming in is as diverse as it can be, that the people that we're choosing to move through the process and to hire. And I wish it was more indicative of the company as a whole. I think we have, by and large, the most diverse group inside HBO. And I think at moments like June, the entire company looked to us suddenly to have very valuable opinions on everything. So I think it's vital to us, is the short answer. It has to. There is not I would not understand a multicultural marketing team that is entirely Asian men, or something, just as an example. But I'll let Simon.
Yeah, no, I think from from the 4A's perspective, we are, fairly diverse, given, that we're in the advertising industry. I think, there is no surprises. The advertising industry, like most sectors, has a lot of work to do and are woefully redundant in their ability to hire diverse people into the organization. And it isn't even about the hiring into the organization. It's what happens to those underrepresented groups, of which the queer community is one. What happens to them when they join that company? Mm-hmm. And what I've said for at least the last 15 years, and try to have conversations with predominantly white male and female CEOs and executive teams, is it's about the belonging, it's about the inclusion of what you do when people come into your organization. And if you inherently have still run a meritocracy where people are not rewarded and recognized for the effort they put in, they're rewarded and recognized because of the exposure and the networks that they have, which goes to the core principles around racism. Then you can keep hiring diverse people into the organization. You're never going to have a diverse organization. And I think too often our industry is obsessed with the numbers and not the people. And so I do think from my perspective, I think it's super important that every role has a diverse slate, that diverse slate isn't just standardized across the organization, that you look at specific roles and specific job titles and go, okay, so if we've got challenges in diversity in this part of the organization, then maybe we need 2 people of color and 1 white person, or we need 2 women and 1 man, or, so I think you've got to adapt for your organization. I think you've got to look at how you're recognizing and rewarding. And I think it's really important that executives today open their doors and listen to their Black employees, their brown employees, their gay employees, and hear those experiences, because until they have those connections, those populations are never going to become the leaders. And we're going to be having the same conversation in 10 years' time or 15 years' time, because the same people are making the same decisions, and they're going to, particularly in advertising, they're going to stick with the devil they know. And, we have an incestuous business and industry, and everyone's worked with everybody else at some point in their career at some organization. And so they're going to hire their friends. They're going to hire the people that they trust. And until they actually know more people, they're just going to continue to hire the, people that look just like them.
I think that's an incredible answer. Thank you so much, Simon. I'm going to bring Graham back in here.
Thanks, Blaise. Thanks, Blaise. This has been great. I feel like I've made you. Yeah. Thank you.
What a powerful final statement from both of you. That was really, really wonderful. I want to thank you both for being fantastic guests. Thank you for tying your personal stories of your career in the discussion. And thank you for addressing the social movements that are accelerating the need for progress and how you've seen the world adapting in really actionable ways. Thank you for talking about the way that challenges like a pandemic and opportunities like growing acceptance are driving really needed human innovation. And I also think it's important to note that another theme running through these discussions is, when we're being honest, we know that politics tie strongly to the work of brands, and we don't discuss those connections enough. So I'm glad we can start to have those conversations more here. So thank you both again very much.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.
That has been this week's wonderful episode of Do the Work. To check out the next episode, find the schedule at dothework.com. That's WERQ. And we're taking a break from tomorrow's open office hours session for the long holiday weekend. But keep an eye out for next week's Hey Fam, which will be on Wednesday, and it will be fabulous. At the website, you can also sign up for more email updates and community connection activities. And please follow us at Do the Work on Twitter and Instagram. And of course, you can find us on Facebook and LinkedIn as well. Thanks again for watching and for all your questions today to the audience. And thanks again to our guests. Bye.